All right. So, good afternoon or good evening or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. If we haven't met yet, my name is Nicole Anterney, and I do work in the Office of Pre-Collegiate Outreach Programs here at WPI. And we are really lucky to work with so many dedicated campus partners to bring you some really great and informative workshops that'll truly help you as you navigate the college admissions process and beyond. Today, I'm really pleased and excited to introduce you to Bailey Rand. Bailey is an Associate Director of Operations in our Career Development Center. And in her position, among many other things, Bailey advises students on a variety of career-related topics. And today, she is going to talk to you about the all-important resume writing. So Bailey, I'm going to give it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to attend this workshop tonight. Excited to talk about resumes with you. And as Nicole said, I do advise students, so I have critiqued a high number of resumes during my time at WPI. I've been at WPI for about 6 years, and I've been in my operations role for 2 years, but before that I worked on our employer relations team with companies who wanted to recruit our students and alumni. So I also have a lot of information for what companies and employers look for in resumes, so I'll be able to kind of provide that lens as well tonight. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. There we go. And I think based on the question that Nicole asked at the beginning, we're probably all kind of going to be coming in at different parts. Some of you may have a resume, some of you may have never written a resume, some may have like, you know, a sort of a started version of a resume, and that's all totally fine. The workshop tonight is really going to go through how you can start to think about what to put on your resume and simply just get it started. You don't need to feel like overwhelmed that you need to have your, whole resume done by tomorrow. It's just to really get your brain to start thinking about the types of things that you could put on your resume, because it's a lot easier to start to make a resume as you go versus trying to put it all together right when you need it. That can be a little bit overwhelming. Also, if you take a class or do a project or something that you think is something you could add on your resume, it's a lot easier to write it in the moment so that it's when the information is the most fresh in your mind. So it just makes it easier to write. So today we're going to go through kind of just the resume basics. So things to keep in mind when you're getting started, things to think about. We're also going to go through the different sections of your resume and how to format everything. And then also, like I said, just to start brainstorming what types of content you can add to your resume, and that it doesn't need to be, an internship or a summer job. There's so many things that you can add to your resume because a lot of your skills are transferable from one experience to another. So your resume is really a personal marketing tool. So it's kind of an advertisement that's used to showcase who you are, to highlight your qualifications, and to do that in an organized and strategic way. I have to tell students at WPI a lot. Obviously, WPI students have a lot of great things to talk about, and they always want to try to convince me that their resume needs to be longer than a page. And I tell them that your resume isn't going to include everything you've ever done. It's really a one-page marketing tool that showcases your best stuff for whatever you're applying to, whether it's a job or college or like a part-time job, whatever it might be. It's really just a marketing tool, and you might change it depending on what you're applying for. Kind of just like advertising companies might change their ad depending on the audience that they're targeting. You might do the same thing with your resume. So kind of like I said on the previous slide with just getting started, it's also a lot easier to just keep taking down that information now, and having what I call a master resume. So your master resume can be pages and pages long, but then when you actually go to apply to something, you could copy and paste it down to the one page that is the most relevant for what you're applying to. So to get started, just to, as I'm going through the different sections, I want you to think about some things that you might include on your resume. So start thinking about classes that you've taken in high school. what types of projects have you done in those classes? Any like really advanced homework assignments or group projects that you did as part of those classes? That might be something that you can put on your resume. If you've participated in engineering summer programs like, Frontiers, how can you showcase that program on your resume and what content can you include? Same thing with volunteer work or community service that you've done. Also part-time jobs that you might have had, AP classes that you've taken, the list goes on and on. So I think that the thing that I hear a lot from high school students and first year students is that they always say, I have nothing that I can put on my resume, but I promise that there's absolutely stuff that you can have on there. So hopefully this workshop tonight will just get you to start thinking about what those things are. So when putting together your resume, you really want to consider the school that you're applying to or the employer's perspective. So if there's one thing I've learned about employers with my time at the WPIS Career Development Center, it's that they're quite lazy because they have to move so quickly and they get so many resumes. So they're not going to spend, 5 minutes looking at each resume with a detailed eye. They really just skim them very, very quickly. They're looking for keywords. They're looking for, for experience and for education that's relevant to what they're hiring for or what they're admitting students for. So you really want to be strategic with how you organize the information on your resume and also the words that you use. In the past, 10 years or so, companies have started to use scanning software. So instead of having an actual human being look at a resume for that first round of applicants, they'll run it through a software system that's really just it just looks at a resume and it matches the number of words that match or are similar to what's on the job description. And the ones that have the highest percentage match will move on to the next round. Obviously, it's not something that we really support or like, but that is something that companies have had to turn to because of the high influx of inbound resumes that they're getting. Excuse me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the layout of your resume, and that's just as important as the content. I would say in almost every job description that I see, or especially for college applications, written communication skills is so important, and it's a skill that everyone is looking for. And your resume is really a sample of your written work. So it's really important that you pay attention to the details. Definitely have other people review it. Once you have a resume and you're the only one looking at it, it just is all going to start to kind of muddle together. So definitely have a friend or a family member take a look through it and kind of help you pick out those mistakes or provide feedback that you could implement. You definitely want to keep it to a page. Like I said, you could have a master resume that's longer, but when you use it for applications, you want to keep it down to a page. Some schools or some companies might ask for something called a CV. That would be a longer document, but for a professional resume, definitely the one page. Obviously, no spelling or grammar mistakes. That can be a quick, even if you're a really perfect candidate, that can be a quick no. So definitely want to check that out. Be consistent in your formatting. Employers pick up on that. So, if you use periods at the end of your sentences, make sure that you do that throughout your whole resume. Don't have periods in some sentences and not in others. Definitely want to be consistent. No acronyms. So especially at WPI, I don't know if you know this, but we have a ton of acronyms. So you want to make sure to spell those out for the first time they appear on your resume, because employers or schools won't know necessarily what they mean. And then most read from the top down. So you want to be strategic in where you organize things and where you put things. You definitely want the most important stuff to be in the top half of the resume, just so that they're guaranteed to have eyes on it. And lastly, you really want to use action verbs, which I'm going to get into a little bit more, but you want to start each sentence with a strong action verb about what you did, and avoid using pronouns. So instead of saying, I worked with a team of 4, just say worked with a team of 4. Kind of continuing with some of the formatting basics. It's a really boring document. Honestly, it's black and white. There's no pictures. It's kind of your basic, most boring Microsoft Word document you could ever imagine. And some students that I talk to really kind of hate that. They want to, especially if they're creative, they want to use columns or make tables or have pictures or graphs and all that kind of stuff, or color. And my answer to that is, while there is some value to having your resume sort of stand out in that way, what we hear from employers over and over again is that they expect certain information to be in certain places. And if they have to hunt for it, or if there's too much going on the page where they can't even simply see kind of where you went to high school or what your degree is, they give up and they move on. So yes, it's a boring document, but that's sort of just the feedback that we get from schools and employers over and over again, that's what they're looking for. There's definitely ways to be creative and to show more of your personality in other documents, like a personal essay for your college application, or in a cover letter for a job. That's sort of a place where you can show more of those creative skills. But for the resume, it's pretty basic. So with font, again, kind of your basic like Times New Roman or Arial, or just something that's really easy to read. You don't want the font to be too small. So we usually say that 11 is the minimum size that you can go down to. And like I said before, just black text. I'm gonna show some examples and definitely encourage using bullets. It just is really easy for the eye to kind of go through a resume and read certain sections. So, but just make sure that when you do bullets that you just keep them consistent and just do one indent of bullets. You don't want to have like multiple indents. Bolding, we're also going to talk about that, and just you want to use bolding in a strategic way. You don't want to bold too much of the document, because then it will make what you really want to stand out not stand out. So just want to be strategic with that. And then dates. So if you just, again, being consistent. So if you write out the date like November 2020, make sure that you write out the months throughout the whole document. Or if you just do 11/2020, just keep it consistent. For spacing, definitely want to have it single spaced. Also, that's just the best way to optimize as much of the page as you can. And then again, just to keep it really simple, no borders, no underlining, no italics, no hyperlinks. Just again, a kind of your basic font and text. With things like underlining and italics, sometimes you'll have to upload your resume to either a college application system or to a job board, and those types of formatting can sort of mess with the document and make it messy. So we just say be on the safe side and just not have them. So now we're going to go through each of the different sections that resumes typically have, but keep in mind that everyone is different. So, some of you may have all of these sections, some of you may just have a few of these sections, but I just want to go through all of these so that you can start to think about the types of things that you could add on your resume. And if you do have it, kind of how you would format that and what the content would look like. But first and foremost, contact information, all of you will have that at the top. You'd be surprised how many resumes I'd see where students forget to either like put their name or any type of contact information, so they can't be contacted. So it's very important. You definitely want to have obviously your name, your address, your phone number, and make sure to include the area code, and also make sure that your voicemail is set up and that it's professional. If a school or a company wants to get in touch with you and you don't answer, you just want to make sure that they're able to leave you a voicemail. Same with your email address, make sure that's professional. And then you also could include a website. So if you have a LinkedIn page, or for technical students, you might have a GitHub where you have sort of some of your projects, you could include that. Or if you have a personal portfolio, you could put the link there as well. And there's two ways that you could format it depending on your preference. The first one is just has your name centered and then your address on the left and your contact information on the right, or you can just center everything. I will say the second version here where everything is centered is definitely a little bit easier from a formatting standpoint. But again, it's really just personal preference and what you prefer. The next section is something called an objective. And it's really a short and sweet statement. It's just to orient the reader as to what you're looking for. It might seem pretty basic, like obviously if you're applying to a college, they, if you've applied to the college, they know that you're applying there. But sometimes like your resume might get detached from an application or from your other information. So it's really helpful to just have that in the objective. And when, like I said before, when companies are skimming really quickly, it's just helpful for them to kind of know what you're looking for. So 2 examples here. For students at WPI, if they're looking for a summer internship, it could be as simple as, summer internship in mechanical engineering. That's very broad. If they knew they wanted to do something, specifically in research and design, they might say, summer internship in R&D if they wanted to be more specific, but it can be very broad. So for college applications, the objective could be, acceptance into the Bachelor of Science in Mathematical Sciences program at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. So very short and sweet, and clear and concise. The next section for all of you will be education. And this really just highlights your educational experiences and your degrees. So for all of you right now, it would be adding your high school. So your high school name, the location, so city, state of your high school, your degree. So if it's like the most common is high school diploma, but some of them have a little bit of a different variation. So whatever your specific degree is. And then if you want to include a GPA, that would be next. We usually say if it's above a 3.0 to include it. If it's on a different scale, that's totally fine. Like if it's out of 100, just make sure you say like out of whatever the scale is. And then what your anticipated graduation date is. So even if it's June of 2021, you don't need to say anticipated. They'll know that if it hasn't happened yet, that it's anticipated. So you don't need to say that word specifically. So that's kind of what the education section would look like, the bare bones. If you wanted to add some related courses, you definitely could do that as well. Related courses is a great place to highlight, higher level classes that you took, like AP courses or technical courses, or maybe, courses in high school that are really relevant to the major or degree that you're hoping to pursue in college. But you definitely don't want to list every class you ever took. You want to kind of pick and choose the 5 to 7 most relevant classes and just list them one after the next. And I think that's it with education. Typically, once you enter college, high school information will stay on your resume, usually until at some point in your sophomore year. It's usually a very natural progression of when high school and everything kind of related to your high school comes off your resume, just because you're going to have so many other things from college that you'll want to add. But typically, yeah, sometimes sophomore year or in the summer in between sophomore and junior year. So another great section that you want to start thinking about is a project section. So the key thing with a project section is that it's anything that you've done in an academic setting. So even if you had a summer job where you did a project, that would be in a different section. The project section is very specifically something that you did in an academic setting, or like it's academic based. So for example, really start, like I said before, to think about, classes that you've taken in college where you've done significant work, whether it was a group project or, just something bigger than a homework assignment where, there was definitely just some meat to the bones of a project, or labs, for example, that's another good one. Maybe you have like science fairs, or if you're a participant in FIRST Robotics, there's obviously a lot of projects associated with that. Also summer programs. So again, just start thinking about, I know it might seem like, oh, it was too small to include on my resume. It was only a 2-week, assignment, or, a one week assignment. But usually if you really think about it, there's a lot of skills that you gained from those experiences. So we included some samples here. So the first one is, if you was a perfect one. If someone's part of the Eagle Scouts, there's a lot of things that go into that. So that's sort of a, outside of academics, but still an extracurricular that could go in your project section. The other one was AP chemistry. So kind of going through some of the labs that they did and really being specific in the technical skills that they obtained from that class. And then if you think of a project that you want to put on your resume, then the next step is, well, okay, but what do I write? How do I write about it? What content should I include? And this is definitely the kind of the art of a resume, and is something that takes time to perfect, and is the reason we have a career development center at WPI, because we really help students, figure out how they should write about their experiences. But if you all have a kind of a project in mind that you're thinking that you could include on your resume, start to ask yourself these following questions. So what did you do? So this first kind of bullet is really just where you provide context to the project, as well as what the objective was. So maybe it was a group project. So you want to say that you mention how many people were in your group. So, worked on a team of 4 to design a wheelchair for, XYZ, whatever the objective was. So it can, again, be sort of short and sweet. You really just want to say what you did. And then the bulk of the content for your projects is, how did you do that? So what steps did you take? Did you, research previous designs to get started? Did you develop like a prototype? Did you interview people to get their, to kind of get more information? What specific technical skills did you use? All that kind of stuff. So you don't want to just stop at what did you do? You really want to go into detail about how you did it. And then the end is kind of, what were the results? So what happened? Did you, like maybe you presented it to your class. Maybe you wrote a written report. Maybe you had a really interesting finding that you wanna share, or maybe your research is being continued by another group. Kind of whatever the outcome is. So within each project, it's kind of like its own mini story, where you make it very easy for the reader to have a strong sense about what you did, how you did it, and what the outcome was. Keeping in mind that if it was a group project, you just kind of want to make sure that you really focus on what you did as part of the group, so that whoever's reading your resume gets a strong sense for your contributions. The next section that you might have is an experience section. So that's kind of where it can be confusing between projects and experience. So whereas project is more academic based, experience would be more job based. So that would be if you had a summer job, a part-time job, a summer internship, that's your work history, kind of like just like the title says. So, and it can be paid, it can be volunteer, it can be related, it can be not related. All work experience is good work experience, like 100%. I mean, any type of job or volunteer work just showcases some type of, responsibility. And employers, especially when you get into college and are looking for those summer internships, having that work experience, even if it's not relevant to the internship that you're looking for, is very valuable. So definitely all good to include on your resume. So how you would set that up is you would have your experience section, and then you would have your title, whatever that might be, and then the company that you worked at or organization, and then the location, and then the date range that you were there. So you can see some examples on this page with finance intern, the company, the location, and then the date range that they were there. The setup is a little bit different, where it has a relevant experience section. The reason for that is, within any section in your resume, if you have a description like the one that's under for the finance internship, you have to have descriptions for anything else that you include in there. So if a student, has a full one-page resume and they don't really have the space to go into detail about what they did as a camp counselor or a cashier, they would fix that by having an additional experience section at the bottom of their resume, where they could still list those things to accommodate for, those skills and the time that they had an experience, but they could save space by not, providing the details on it. For high school students, I would say at this point, you're probably just going to have one experience section where you definitely provide the details for different types of jobs. So for, camp counselor positions, cashier positions, like lifeguarding, all of those are very valuable, and you should have a description for each one about what you did. So, even if it's like providing customer service or managing, a really busy work schedule, all of those are very transferable skills that you'd want to include on your resume. You could, though, if you wanted to separate like experience and then volunteer experience, that would be one thing that you could separate as well. You could have those two different sections, but other than that, I think that's it with experience. Another section is a skills section. So this is really a place where you just simply list your technical skills. So it's not going to include soft skills like teamwork or presentation skills or time management. It's really just going to focus on technical skills and technical programs. Even if obviously a lot of you will have those softer skills, but you really should be demonstrating those through the content in your other sections. Anyone could write that they have teamwork skills or presentation skills, but actually showcasing that in your project section by saying that you did a formal presentation goes a much longer way than just listing that you have good, public speaking skills. So the skills section, just technical. So it will say skills, and then you'll want to break it up into different categories. And again, this will be different for every single student. So you might have a software or a computer section where you list computer programs that you're familiar with. So Microsoft is a very common one. So you could list all the Microsoft programs that you know. If you've done things in a lab, you definitely could have a lab techniques section, foreign languages, all of those are great. And then up here, there's some other recommendations for things that you could think about as well to include. A common question is, how familiar or how good do I have to be, in PowerPoint to include it on my resume? And usually, our answer to that question is like, if you were to get asked by a company or by a school in your college admissions interview, if they asked you about something that was in your skills section, you just want to be able to answer, what that program is and provide an example of when you used it. You don't want to be like a deer caught in headlights, being like, not knowing like what it is. So just making sure that you would feel comfortable and confident answering a question if you were asked directly about it. And then just trust your gut. Usually if it's feeling a bit weird to add it to your resume, that's probably a sign to maybe hold off until you have a little bit more experience. But think about it too, because you don't want to sell yourself short as well. So, but that's kind of the rule of thumb that we tell students. And then another big section, especially for high school students, is an activities section. So this is where you could include kind of everything that you're participating in high school, whether it's clubs and organizations, sports, or community and volunteer work like we talked about. So definitely want to get that, list together of what the organization or the sport was, the school, like your high school name that you did it at, and then the date range that you were a participant. And then you might have, if you had a leadership role in one of those organizations, or if you were a captain on a sports team, you could have a leadership section where you actually highlight that role and then go into more detail about what you did in that position. So that's what's happening here. So the leadership section, you put your title first, and then the organization, the school that you were a member of that organization, and then the date range that you were in that organization. And then you would have a paragraph or a bulleted list of, what that position entailed and kind of maybe your impact that you had in that position as well. And then if you have additional activities that you want to include, but you don't want to have descriptions for them, that's where you can have an activities section where you just list them one after the next. And you wouldn't relist, like in this example here, Engineers Without Borders wouldn't be listed again in the activity section. You just want to list it once. That's sort of a good thing to remember with resumes. You never want to double list things because space is going to be at a premium. I know you might be feeling now like it will be really hard for you to fill a page, but eventually that's going to change so quickly and you're going to be begging for space. So just really keep that in mind, that you don't want to double list things. Just list it once in the best place. And then in award sections. So this is optional, but it's something that, especially if you have awards from high school that you want to highlight, you could include. And it could include, like the list here, President's Awards, scholarships, Dean's List or honor roll, National Honor Society, all that kind of stuff. And the format for that is pretty basic. You just list the award, the school that you received it at, and then the date that you received it at, or like with honor roll, if it was a continuous thing, you could include the date range. My one thing with awards is if it's sort of an award that no one would know looking at your resume except for you, or like the very specific place where you got the award, it might not be the best thing to include, just because it might not, without the context, it might not make sense. But other than that, definitely go forward, have an award section. I would guess at this point, most of you would have one as well. So that is awards. You could also call it honors, whatever you prefer, awards or honors, just personal preference. And then, like I said, kind of at the beginning, resumes can be customized to your specific situation. So you might add other things on it, like research experience, or publications or conferences that you maybe attended as part of high school. If you have a strong international experience, could definitely list that or highlight that in some way. So again, you really want to make sure that whatever you think, like has given you a strong skill set, then you want to include that, on your resume. And it's really, if you format it in a way and package it in a way that really demonstrates skills that you obtained, the reader will definitely like understand it. So it's there's a lot that you can add to your resume, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is don't feel like you don't have things that you can include. There's definitely a lot that you can add to it. And so this is an example. This is sort of a very sort of boiled down version of the template that we give to WPI students, kind of just going through each section. So, name at the top, address, contact information, then that short and sweet objective, their education. So this is a WPI student, so they'd have their Worcester Polytechnic Institute degree, then their high school information, their related courses, then it would jump into their skills section, their project section, their experience, and then activities and awards at the bottom. So again, this is just one version. Depending on the student, they might have, they might want to have their leadership, right underneath their education, because they really want to highlight that, or because it's the most relevant to what they're applying to. But this is sort of what it would look like when it all comes together. And then finally, just kind of in summary, some really big takeaway items is, like I said at the top, be meticulous. So make sure there are no spelling or grammar errors. Bring in other people to review it. Definitely no more than one page. Use those action verbs. I'm going to give you a URL on the last slide for all of our resources, and our resume resource tip sheet has a whole page of action verbs. So I think it has like 50 to 75 action verbs that you can choose from. And definitely don't focus on your limitations. So really just focus on what you do have. And also keeping in mind that in addition to your resume, people will probably search for you on social media. So you want to just make sure, as you move forward, that you're projecting a professional and appropriate image, as well as keeping an eye on your privacy settings as well. And yeah, if you wouldn't want your grandmother to see it, then you probably don't want to post it. Is kind of the final thing. So as I said, if you want to look for more information, if you go to wpi.edu/plus CDC resources, all of our resources are public. So we try not to hide anything. So the first section on that page will be all about resumes. So it'll have that resume template that I just showed you. It'll also have a longer document going through each section, and it'll have specific examples from WPI students. If you want to get a sense for, how they took a project and talked about it, it will have those examples and then a rubric as well for you to kind of do a self-grade assessment of your resume and how you could improve it. So definitely encourage you to look at those resources. And then, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that people have.
Thank you, Bailey. That was awesome. I feel like I was nodding my head as you were going along. I'm like, yeah, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. They got to write this down. So it's really great information. And I would take advantage of asking Bailey questions now while you have her. I'm sure you'll have lots to.
Yeah, I see one. Oh, yeah, my school has a weighted GPA out of 5. So how should I reflect that on my resume? Great question. That comes up a lot. So you would simply write when you, actually, let me just go back to the slide. So, you know, high school diploma, GPA 3.7 out of 4.0. Then in parentheses, right after that, just write weighted. So, you know, maybe your GPA is like a 5.2 out of 5.0. Just put weighted in parentheses to give that context, and that's how you can do that. You also could list both, like if you wanted to list your unweighted GPA and then your weighted, but sometimes schools don't have both. So just give it the context in parentheses, and that should be enough.
And Bailey, I am not seeing the Q&A box pop up on my screen, so I can only see if there's anything in the chat.
Oh, let's see. Are there any in the chat?
No, not right now. I guess you covered everything.
It's a lot of information.
Yes.
It can be very overwhelming. So again, like I said, like biggest takeaway is simply just to start, like, even if you don't write anything, that's totally fine. Just start thinking about, like, when you go to, you know, when you go to class and start taking classes or do homework or do, you know, big assignments, just ask yourself, like, wow, is this something that I could put on my resume? And if you think that it is, just write some notes about what you did, how you did it, like what skills you learned, what skills you used, you know, what the outcomes were, because it just makes it so much easier when you have to go back to put it all together. You're going to thank yourself for taking those notes. You know, even if it's 3 months down the road, it can be so hard to remember specifically what you did. So just start to pay attention to those things and what you might be able to include.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with that so much, Bailey, because there's been many times where I think, oh, all right, I'll remember that. That was a big deal. How could I forget that? And then when you go to put it on paper, the details and it all just isn't in your brain like it used to be. So that's a great tip.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see if,
do we need specific dates or can we estimate?
Good question. So I would say best case scenario is to have specific dates in terms of months and years. So you don't have to have this like that the project started on May 15th, but generally having the month is good. If you really can't remember, I would say just make your best guess. Just say, you know, if you think it was in the spring of 2018 that you did it, then just say like April to June, you know, of 2018. Just make your best guess. No one's gonna, unless it's a job. If it's a job that you're hired at, you really, I'd recommend actually calling the organization or the company. This is for kind of down the road, but just making sure that the dates line up, because if they ever were to check or do a reference check, that's a very common question that they'll ask is, what dates were you there? So you just want those to make sure that those match.
Great, good question. Well, yes, the recording will be, we will be sending out links. We are uploading all of the recordings onto a private YouTube channel, and we'll get that out to you probably by the end of the week. We also will be posting the PowerPoint in your Canvas account.
Awesome.
I have a quick last question. was the one who also wrote about the specific date. But so in my case, I was doing a program with WPI actually, and it ended shortly because of COVID. So like it was supposed to end in April, but we ended in like March and did a few more weeks online. So should I be giving the date as March because that's when we actually ended, or April because that's when we were supposed to end?
I think I would do April, especially since it sounds like you continued to do work into April, even though it was
Yeah.
even though it was virtual.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say April.
Okay.
Or if that still felt a little bit strange, you could. I would still write April, but this is something that is going to come up with a lot of students this year with COVID. Actually writing, after the date in parentheses, cut short due to COVID-19.
Okay.
Something that, yeah, it's very common on resumes for this 2020 year.
True. Good point. All right. I'm going to stop the recording in case anybody isn't comfortable asking with the recording going, and we can continue to see if anybody has any additional questions.